One book, a lie, in a world that changed forever. Imagine living in a world where a single book could turn your neighbor, your friend, and even your own family against you. A book so powerful that it fueled hysteria, justified torture, and led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Welcome back. This is Gary Watson, and this is episode 3 of my solo podcast series, which I've entitled Echoes of Deception. Now, you'll recall in episode 2, what we focused on was the fact that one book was able to influence judicial practice well beyond the 15th century when the book was written. Now, in this episode, we're going to target a question, and the question is really related to gender, and we're going to ask why did Kramer fixate on women? History tells us there were 3 enablers. One was theological, the second was legal, and the third one had to do with the connection of sexuality, women, and the devil worship. Let's take them one at a time. First, on Scripture. Kramer used Scripture and Christian doctrine, as he best understood it at the time, to really put women in a box where they were viewed as weak and emotionally vulnerable, of lesser value to daily life. That was fundamental to his story and what enabled him to write the book. Now, we have to allow for the fact that Kramer in modern times would be called a psychopath. While that's true, nonetheless, a significant portion of the population was heavily influenced by the stories that were told not only by Kramer, but in the scriptures. And that's one of the key points that we need to come back. Stories don't have to be true. They only have to be believed. And when they are believed, there can be devastating consequences. And the gender bias that was expressed in his book, Malleus Maleficarum, in other words, the hammer of witches, was in essence a bias that lasts to this current moment in time. Now, let's get on to the second one, legal vulnerability. Women were often had lesser financial means. They were not integrated into the society in a way that allowed them to gain the same level of legal protection that men would, or to defend themselves in a court of law. After all, it was true that not many people were literate at the time. A lot of people couldn't read or write, and so that was why people like Kramer came to power, because behind Kramer, he was the fundamental interpreter of what was true in the Bible. And of course, if it was true in the Bible and the Bible came from God, there could be no questioning. So the same happened when the state connected with the church and the legal systems. The judgments made were based on the beliefs of the time. So gender bias was certainly one of those beliefs. Now, the last category is one that kind of puts an aura around Kramer's psychopathy, and that is his connection, his fixation on sexuality, and that women were lustful by nature and sexual by nature, and able to have intercourse with spirits like the devil and other imagined entities. So they became targets because of their immorality and their heresy. And that was the third enabler. So the question that logically stems from the previous one is, were women always targets in the prosecution and the accusations surrounding witchcraft and heresy? And the simple answer is no. And they go back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia and the beginning of civilization when there was recorded record. And a lot of that was based on people fearing what they didn't understand, and that enabled sorcerers to become scapegoats, and witches to become scapegoats for things that people couldn't find a cause for in their life. And so that was the underlying seed. But it really took off in the 15th century and the Middle Ages. And the reason for that is multifaceted, of course. But some of the main factors, I think the one that I focused on in developing the context for this story was the connection of the church and the state, which began to come together and solidify in the Christian domain, at least in that time frame. And in particular, you have to understand that the scripture was in Latin, and the general population was not able to read or speak in Latin. So they relied on the clergy. And when the clergy connected with state officials, and that integrated into all aspects of life, it became clear that as the beliefs changed about women and the gender bias really took hold, that combination caused the focus that we still see today. So think of witch trials as ritualized scapegoating during periods of mass anxiety. By projecting fear and rage onto the witch, authorities could reaffirm the social order of the time, which was accepted as desirable by the general population. Authorities could redirect popular unrest away from church and state failings. And that allowed them to reassert patriarchal control over women's bodies, their sexuality, and the social roles that they were allowed to play. And all of this was really political theater masquerading as moral justice. So, what are we able to conclude from all of this? Well, witchcraft wasn't merely cultural superstition. It was a deliberate intersection of misogyny, religious dogma, and authoritarian control. The alignment of religion and political power used the image of the female witch as a scapegoat to stabilize irrational social outbreaks, enforce conformity, and suppress dissent. So now it's tempting to ask, does this have a modern echo? What do you think? Well, let's fast forward into the United States today, and we're seeing disturbing resonance, debates about abortion rights, especially when the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022. Those kinds of actions have rekindled the efforts to regulate women's reproductive choices through legislation and social pressure. And just as the midwives in the medieval period were compelled to monitor and report on women's private lives, today the states, as we speak, are enacting laws that empower individuals, sometimes even strangers, to report women or healthcare providers' suspected of facilitating abortions. Think about that. This modern surveillance reflects the deep-seated misogynistic impulse to control women's bodies and their choices, that the same things that enabled the medieval authorities to wield power over midwives and unwed mothers. So the tactics have changed, social media has changed, legal reporting hotlines exist, but the underlying impulse to police and punish women for defying norms, patriarchal norms, is chillingly familiar. On that note, I'm going to conclude episode 3 because it's a nearly perfect transition to the next episode, where I'm going to ask the question, what does it take to stop someone like Kramer, who was a misogynistic bully, a compulsive liar, and someone who had no ability to empathize or care about the impact of his own actions on others? And in order to do that, we're going to go back to another character that I've mentioned before, and her name was Helena Schuberin. And Helena spoke truth to power, and it had consequences. And then we're going to transition to 1956, where Helena's spirit found another home in a woman standing on a porch in Montgomery, Alabama. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll take the time to share this episode, this echo of deception, with others. And until then, have a great day. Every day is special, and it's your turn to make some hope and share it with somebody else. Thanks a bunch.